It could quite easily be argued that the Clone Wars cartoon is among the most influential Star Wars projects of all time, and an enthusiastic fan could even make the argument that Clone Wars has contributed to Star Wars just as much as many of the movies. After all, the show amassed quite a lengthy runtime across its 7 seasons, and it used that runtime to make a wide variety of additions to the Star Wars universe, redefining what we knew about legacy characters, introducing new storylines, and expanding the mythology of Star Wars in ways that could only be approached in an extended TV format. But this Clone Wars cartoon was not the first attempt to tell the story of the Clone Wars, nor was it the first attempt to tell this story in a cartoon format. And though Clone Wars 2008 has earned an extremely positive reputation, there are a vocal group of fans that consider this earlier 2003 iteration to be a far superior story. Is there credibility in this idea? Well, let's talk about that. But before we dive into the specifics of what sets the two shows apart from a content perspective, we first have to acknowledge that any comparison between the two shows is a bit of an apples and oranges situation, thanks to the show's dramatically different formats. Yes, both shows are Star Wars cartoons, but the 2003 show refers to itself as a micro-series, and it has a runtime of just a couple hours, thanks to the majority of the episodes falling into a 3 to 5 minute range. By contrast, the 2008 series is a full TV show designed to fit into a half-hour time slot, and has a runtime of about 56 hours. This means purely by virtue of runtime itself, 2008 gets to cover a lot more than the 2003 series. But this is partially a reflection of the goals of the two shows, which were quite different. By 2008, the prequels were comfortably retreating into the rear view mirror. They had not been nearly as beloved as originally hoped, but Revenge of the Sith had stuck the landing fairly well, and it was the perfect time to capitalize on the existence of a younger generation of Star Wars fans, who were far more receptive to the prequel era, allowing this new show both to revisit some of the areas where the prequels fell short, as well as double down on the era's strengths in a way that expands the Star Wars galaxy in preparation for future projects. In 2003, the list of requirements for a Clone Wars show was much simpler. There was only one project that you needed to be setting the stage for, and that was Revenge of the Sith. In the spirit of that more focused goal, and in the spirit of a shorter runtime, it was best to keep things relatively simple and relatively focused on what we see in the movies. This affects the story in a variety of ways, but few are more obvious than the characterization of Anakin Skywalker. The 2008 series had many goals, but few were more successful than the rehabilitation of Anakin, whose unlikability was at one point one of the biggest marks against the prequel trilogy. Hayden Christensen's whiny delivery of George Lucas's infamously awkward dialogue perfectly captured the grating personality of an unstable teenage savant with unparalleled emotional issues. But with all of Anakin's flaws fully on display, the vast majority of audiences thoroughly rejected the character. In a post-Revenge of the Sith world, the 2008 series now had to find a way to get the audience not only to view Anakin as a hero, but as a hero that they're willing to sit down and watch for 56 hours, without fully jeopardizing the idea that Anakin was doomed to become Vader. Today, Anakin is the most popular Star Wars character from any era. Audiences scream when he appears on screen, scream when Hayden Christensen appears on stage, and act genuinely confused when a Star Wars project doesn't involve or mention Anakin. It would be putting it mildly to say that the character's reputation has made a comeback beyond anyone's wildest expectations, and the 2008 series lies at the center of that turnaround. The show's depiction of Anakin as a brash, confident leader has completely overtaken his original appearance. Anakin is a competent mentor, a gifted general, and an unparalleled warrior. He's hot-headed, but always in the pursuit of justice. So even when he takes things a little too far, it's typically at the expense of someone who deserves it, allowing the audience to sympathize with his darker side. To many people now, Anakin is Star Wars, but in 2003, that rehabilitation had not yet begun. With only Attack of the Clones to go off of, the unlikability of this version of Anakin hits you like a truck, especially if you're like me and you've gotten used to the more modern portrayal of the character. This Anakin is whiny, rude, and awkward. He's not necessarily in the right when he ignores Obi-Wan's orders, and he often seems slightly out of control. His darker moments don't carry the tone of moral justification they often do in the 2008 series, and the plot elements designed to explore his better qualities aren't really possible in such a fast-moving format. He really does feel like Attack of the Clones Anakin in all the wrong ways. But this isn't necessarily a mark against the show itself, because there's an argument to be made for the idea that this is how Anakin always was supposed to be. Sure, I prefer a likable Anakin Skywalker, as many people probably do, judging by how popular the character is now, but the whitewashing of Anakin can leave the prequel trilogy feeling a little disjointed, as if Anakin's unlikability in Episode 2 was on Hayden's performance and not a deliberate writing choice. By contrast, 2003's portrayal of Anakin staying largely consistent with his immaturity in the movies makes his original characterization feel like a really intentional decision, even if that is a decision that they steered away from in later years. But whitewashing characters with dubious morals is not a practice the 2008 series reserved for just Anakin. And in the case of the clones, the gap between characterization may be a little more subtle, but it has a profound impact on the story. If the 2008 series wanted you to know one thing, it's that the clones were human. That each and every clone was different. Yes, they're soldiers, but they're a brotherhood, the heroic backbone of the Republic. But they do end up killing their Jedi generals, so in order to absolve them of that guilt, Clone Wars 2008 introduces the Inhibitor Chip, a biological program that literally prevents the clones from ignoring orders from Palpatine. This does successfully remove any blame from the clones' shoulders, allowing the audience to fully root for each clone as the show fleshes them out as individual characters you can fully sympathize with. In the 2003 series, the clones are soldiers. They're clinical in their approach to combat and low on word count. As versions of Jango Fett modified into the perfect soldier, they're hyper-competent living weapons, and they don't feel the need to take their helmets off every few scenes to remind you how human they are. Their interactions with the Jedi seem to largely be professional in nature, a cold, detached, working relationship. And when they do shoot those Jedi generals in the back, it was them doing it. Just another in a long line of orders they were always going to follow. Like with most other story elements, there isn't necessarily a purely better way to depict the clones, but this particular difference does have far-reaching effects on the story as a whole. I can poke fun at the 2008 series' tendency to take the clones' helmets off at every possible moment, but if so much effort wasn't put into emphasizing the clones' humanity, stories about 99, 5s, and Order 66 would not have worked nearly as well, and those are among the most popular stories in the entire show. Similarly, characters like Rex and Echo have become fan favorites in a way that wouldn't have been possible if they were just faceless soldiers. But this brothers first, soldiers second outlook is not without its drawbacks. There's something truly sinister about the Republic using living weapons to fight their battles, and that's only made more unnerving by the 2003 clones' drone-like lack of personality. Depicting the Republic's main fighting force as overwhelmingly heroic in nature definitely takes away from the idea that the Clone Wars is a massive, brutal conflict between two overwhelmingly corrupt factions, and making the Inhibitors a hidden plot places the majority of the guilt solely on Palpatine. The 2003 series is not the place to find moral nuance or complex character writing, but at the very least, it puts the two factions on slightly more even ground than Filoni's writing, who longtime viewers of this channel will know I think is slightly too biased in favor of the Republic. This bias is displayed in two primary areas, morality and competency. And while the Separatists still seem pretty scummy in the 2003 series, the issue of competency is perhaps what the series has become the best known for, thanks in part to the show's unofficial poster child, General Grievous. One of the most common criticisms, not just of the 2008 series, but Star Wars as a franchise, is the existence of action figure villains, characters with exceptionally cool visual designs that don't actually get to do a whole lot. Star Wars being written out of chronological order can make it difficult to build tension, since who lives and dies is often determined in the movies, and Grievous specifically struggles from a lack of characters that he can actually kill without messing up the timeline. There's only so many times he can scuttle away coughing before he stops looking like a credible threat, and the 2008 series easily clears that number. But the 2003 series shows Grievous not only as a threat, but as a borderline unbeatable one. He's an unstoppable force that inspires true fear in his opponents, easily capable of taking out entire teams of Jedi in near silence. The lack of his trademark cough almost turns him into a horror movie villain, and he actually wins the majority of his fights. I especially liked the scene where Dooku instructs Grievous to only engage Jedi when he has the element of surprise, as it provides a bit of context that helps transform the droid general from coward to ambush predator. The differences in characterization for Anakin and the clones leave a lot of room for subjective opinions, but it's difficult not to see the way 2003 handles Grievous as definitively better. And thankfully, he's not the only competent villain in the show. The 2003 series also introduced Dirge as well as Asajj Ventress, who I think really thrives within the show's iconic art style. The heroes also receive some time to shine, especially Mace Windu, who has a number of iconic action scenes, the last of which features him force-crushing Grievous's chest as he escapes with the Chancellor, perfectly setting up the beginning of Episode 3, which would come out in a few short months, as well as explaining why Grievous was such a decreased threat in that movie. Despite everything this series did well, it's exceptionally difficult to make the case for it being the better Star Wars project between the two Clone Wars shows. It may do individual things better, and it's certainly more willing to adhere to the unaltered original vision of the Star Wars prequels, but it's not a coincidence that the reputation of those prequels didn't truly turn around until the later series really hit its stride. From a lore perspective, the 2008 series was a franchise-defining show that now serves as a major cornerstone for the past almost 2 decades of Star Wars storytelling. As the show that popularized the "we'll fix it in another project" style of writing, as well as the inability to keep legacy characters dead, there are certainly valid reasons to criticize Filoni's version of the Clone Wars, but those reasons are generally outnumbered by the pure volume of quality additions to the already expansive Star Wars galaxy. But if 2008 was expansive, 2003 was efficient, and as a result, it's probably the better viewing experience, not as a Star Wars project, but as an actual show. At just about 3 hours long, it can be watched in a single sitting, and front to back, it is full of the quality animation and streamlined storytelling Genndy Tartakovsky's shows are famous for. Sometimes simplicity is king, and there's no better window into the early world of the prequels than this.